So could you give it to this gentleman? Put his hand, sir, put your hand up, that's right. And we have another one there as well. So why don't we take a few questions before we close? So I'm getting real, I'm not just emailing my mother, I am getting real-time updates on them.
First, let me thank you for giving me the chance to discuss what we learned from the panel about the future of investment in Egypt. First, there is let's call it illusion about balance of payment in Egypt. Recently, we have surplus. The surplus is concentrated in the capital market. What we concern now about is $16 billion in T-bills and another $4 billion in longer term. This is $20 billion. Now, for the panel, the first question is, please tell me how this money, about $20 billion, could be moved from so-called hot money, and we have to remember what happened in the Asian countries, export-oriented countries, and what happened in 1997. Second one is, when you have the private sector percentage in GDP down to 51% from over 70%, this is not giving you alarm about the orientation? There is crowding out effect. You cannot talk about employment when the machine of making business is already down in percentage of GDP. I have more questions, but I will give chances to the others. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take the other gentleman who's behind you as well, so we can just do two at once. And if there's any more, will you wave very obviously? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Nouman Khaled from CI Asset Management, buy-side economist. I have one clarification and also one question. The panel, somehow all the speakers managed to deliver a message that all of like FDIs and equities and fixed income are all as hot as each other, which in my point of view, is not true. It takes a lot of time for an FDI investor to liquidate its assets. It takes a lot of time for an equity investor to realize the gains that he came to the country in order to gain. But it takes only like one correction in the currency, an appreciation or a steep depreciation for $15 billion to get out of the country. And I think we have a proof of what happened in 2011 when around $15 billion got out of the country in only 6 months. They were fixed income portfolio. So my question is, in your own opinion, and maybe this is directed towards the banking part and Hania, how do you think we should use the $15 billion currently? Some say that we should keep it in an escrow account or in the reserves, or maybe use part of it to import and like inject it into the economy. Thank you.
Zaha, you want to comment? Please go ahead.
I want to answer the question regarding the private sector from a banking standpoint. Okay, the total level of deposits in the banking sector is today around 3 trillion Egyptian pounds. Total loans and facilities around 1.7 trillion. 81% given to the private sector. 81% of loans and credit facilities in all the banking sector in Egypt is to the private sector. And I want to add one piece of information. Level of performing facilities in excess of 95%. Very high quality assets. So this is a reply from a banking sector point of view.
Hani, do you want to?
Sure.
We need to sort of wrap up. His Excellency is sitting in the front row, so if you want to address your sort of semi-colleague's question.
Well, I'll start off with the first question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure, because I think there's a very big difference between the Egyptian situation and that of the Asian crisis in 1997, which was more attributed to a banking crisis rather than a balance of payment crisis. So we do not have a weak banking sector in Egypt. If anything, I think that the strong case for the Egyptian reform that took place in the local banking sector back in 2005 and 6 that has empowered that financial industry in Egypt with enough strength to face unprecedented crisis politically, like the revolution, and what followed economically, does point to the fact that we have a very strong banking crisis. So I disagree that there is any similarity between the two. The fear of outflows, which is shared by the second question, when it comes to hot money, let me remind my colleague that despite the fact that there was $10 to $12 billion that left the country that were invested in treasury bills and bonds, there was another $6 to $7 billion that were meaning to leave the country just from local investors at the time. And in addition to the fact that I think if we are to perceive portfolio investments to be a source of risk, that concept of banking, whereby any client can go to a bank and withdraw their money in a split of a second, would leave that concept, unutilized. So I think it's a matchmaking problem rather than the will to discriminate or favor a type of investment over others. So I believe that the way that the central bank is operating today does provide a big room to secure whatever funding that is needed to leave the country without any problem, given that whatever they receive in assets from foreigners, which is considered in their case to be a liability, is invested in foreign assets. So there's no mismatch problem in that sense.
So a vote of confidence there. Sharif, you were nodding your head. Do you want to say anything? Because we're going to have to bring this to a close, but do you agree with Hani, or do you agree with the implied questioner that there is a systemic risk there that we're not looking at?
I think the only point I would say is I think it would be great to see the private sector share of overall economic activity going back as a percentage to where it used to be. It's understandable why in the last 24 months there was an increase in the public sector's participation, largely for infrastructure projects, etc., as enablers for the return of private sector activity. But looking forward, it will be very encouraging to see the wheels starting to turn again for the private sector's involvement.
Okay.
I think actually this is what we've been all voicing in the panel. So actually just to comment on both questions, what we have been talking about in the panel is when is the shift going to happen? And we all actually agree with you that the shift has to happen. Question is how and when and how long the process is going to take. That remains the unknown. But at the end of the day, I think we all actually have the same goal or more or less in agreement. So we're not saying that everything is rosy and fantastic, but we're saying that there's been a lot of reforms that took place. The hot money, whatever name we want to give it to, was needed and is still needed, but there has to be a shift towards investments in order to capitalize on the opportunity that we have today, and I think we all acknowledge that. So.
But I think actually, as you said at the beginning, I mean, sorry, it wasn't you, it was you, Hani. Calling it hot money gives it a bad, if you called it short-term liquidity, it would sound much better. Yes. I mean, I'm being a little bit silly about that, but the point is, hot money does have, it's a pejorative term. It has inevitably negative
correlations.
People off.
It scares people off when you say that.
If you need short-term liquidity and you can get it, okay, it's expensive, but it has a role and it's necessary.
And the costs will come down, and that's what we're saying.
And by the way, just to add to your point, I think if it wasn't for that type of sudden influx of foreign currency from abroad, there would not be the type of growth that we're witnessing today. So hot money did provide a lot of room for the economy to breathe.
Absolutely, yeah. But we're not calling it hot money.
Yeah, starting today.
Absolutely not. Right, I'm being given lots of looks from the front row, so I will do my job and bring this to an end so that we can start our session with the Minister. So please, could you all join me in thanking this excellent panel.